I would like to say hello to everyone and welcome to our fourth Axel Springer Women event already this year and our second ever fully virtual event thanks to COVID-19. And when we came together last time in person back in March, just a few months ago, for the very first Axel Springer Women Day in Berlin, amongst others with Dorothee Bär, our German Federal Minister for Digital Affairs, with more than 100 participants, we would really not have imagined that only 2 months later we will meet back fully virtually for the first Axel Springer Women Virtual Series event. Back then with Sherazade Semsah de Boissesson, the CEO of Politico Europe, and this was really a huge success. And this actually made us think of more virtual events for Axel Springer Women. And today we are very, very proud to kick off our second virtual series with another power woman and role model within the Axel Springer family that you can already see on the screen, Alyson Shontell, the editor-in-chief of Business Insider. And I would like to say welcome, Alyson, even though the official introduction will follow, but welcome. And so we are so glad and honored to have you here today. And before we start and hand over to Alyson, let me give you just a brief introduction on us women, because I think we also have some new participants on the video conference. So more than a year ago, Claudia Pieweg and I started Axel Springer Women, finding ourselves actually surrounded by mainly male peers in our different leadership teams. Please yourself, everyone. Perfect. And what particularly struck us, particularly in the annual physical Axel Springer leadership meetings in the last 2 years, was the low female share, below 10%. And I truly believe that change can and needs to happen from within the employees, hence by more women and men raising their voice, addressing inequalities, and actively working on solutions. And Axel Springer Women is one way, so to say, to work on solutions, and our claim is connect, inspire, grow. Hence, we are a platform for women and men to connect and to support each other, to share success stories, and ideally also support each other in promotions and in developing further, both within Axel Springer, but also eventually beyond. And I'm very proud to say that our initiative is also being supported by our executive board, which is not given, and we are very, very happy about it. And today, so after my introduction, you will get some participation hints, how can you ask your questions, etc. Then a short introduction and Alyson, and basically then we will hand over to Alyson, who will present her impressive career and personal development. And then basically the interview will start after that. And now I would like to hand over to our fabulous Axel Springer Women organization team. You have again done a tremendous job. And I would like to thank Caroline, Birgit, Janine, Stephanie, Lukas, Aline, and my co-founder, Claudia. So Caroline, please take over.
Yes, thanks from my side too, Gülscha. And right now I'd like to give everyone a very brief introduction to our participation hints for today. So please make sure to leave your default settings as they are. Keep your cameras turned off and your microphones muted, just to make sure that the system won't get overloaded here. And the second point is the organizational manager Q&A session or part for today. As you are muted, please send us your questions throughout the whole event via the chat function here in BlueJeans. So at any time feel free to please send Alyson your questions, which she will answer after her presentation. And the third point is that we would like to let you know that this event is being recorded to be able to send the recording after the event to everyone who wasn't able to participate for today. So now I'd like to hand over to Claudia, who will introduce Alyson to you. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Caroline. Good morning to New York. Good morning, Alyson, and good evening to probably the rest of us. Well, maybe you have some employees with you, I don't know. So good morning to the US at least. Okay, so we are talking to Alyson today. Who is Alyson? She's 34 years old. Alyson is a mother. of a child, and she graduated in psychology and advertising. And thus, she joined Business Insider 12 years ago as the 6th employee. And the first job she had there was as a sales planner. And then 10 years ago, in 2010, she joined the editorial team. And then in 2016, she was appointed editor-in-chief, at which point, and this is really very impressive, she became the youngest and only woman to run a global business publication. And she launched a podcast on success, which is called This is Success, where she interviews founders of companies, board members, and writers, and other important or interesting people, such as Sheryl Sandberg. And now I'm very much interested in what you are going to say to us and what you're going to tell us. Alyson, the stage is yours.
Thank you both so much. Thank you all of you for having me. It is a pleasure to speak with you today. I presented some slides because just listening to me talk on and on for 20 minutes would be very boring otherwise. But I'm going to try and tell you my story as openly, honestly, and personally as possible, because there are bumps and bruises. It's not just a straight shot. And I don't think hiding it helps anybody. But I also think that I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of my path and how I was able to accelerate success by joining a high growth company, which I think is something that more women in general should think about as a career path if they can. And I actually think that it can also help solve some of the inequality in the workplace situations that we've got going on. So with that, let me attempt to get technically savvy and share with you my screen. Okay. Can you see that? Is the thumbs up? All right, let's get going. Okay, so thank you so much for having me. My name's Alyson. I joined Business Insider as a 6th employee. I rose up as a tech reporter. I was covering, a lot of my reporting helped write the histories of Uber, Snapchat, Pinterest, WeWork, the companies that are IPOing or imploding today. They are going both ways. I have interviewed everyone from sports stars to politicians to business moguls. I'm very fascinated with how people got to where they are. So I guess this is fitting that I'm talking to you about how I got where I am today. And another important thing that you should know about me is I am a mom, because it does make me sometimes better at my job, sometimes worse at my job because I have less time, but he is the best thing on the planet. So this is my 2-year-old Nathan. So I'm very fortunate in that way as well. So if I had to sum up how I got to where I am, I basically paired what I was obsessed with and my passion, which was journalism, tech, and startups, with a startup career path, which has led me to achieve success at an early age. And joining a startup is absolutely not for everybody. It is incredibly risky. Most startups fail. I was very fortunate to join one that didn't fail. Most people in startups fail. It is hard to adapt with a company that's changing so quickly. But if it's something that you feel like you can potentially pull off, there's a lot of potential upside. And some of the most successful people in the world have done a startup career path to success. And in general, I think it's a path that more women should consider. I also want to caveat this with, what I did is unfortunately not accessible to everybody. I am privileged, I come from privilege, and I understand that. So I'm just hoping that even with the unfair and unequal head start that I've gotten, some of what I say might be a little bit inspiring, because really the bottom line is we just need like all sorts of women reaching really, really high in their careers and being really as ambitious as possible to help kind of change the game around. So today I'm going to talk to you about what a career path in a startup is, how I think it can solve some workplace inequity, how I wound up at a startup in the first place, which was not my plan, and then how I climbed to editor-in-chief, and honest advice and missteps along the way. So the bottom line is that most corporations are broken for women. I don't think that this is some secret. A 2019 Lean In study found that women can fall behind from the very first promotion, and it's going to take decades for us to receive equal pay. Women who do reach the top are still hitting a ceiling. They're shoved into number 2 positions as COOs. Not a bad position, but not the top job. And only 7% of Fortune 500 CEOs are women. So to help fix that, we need more women who are building the next Fortune 500 companies. And there's a lot of benefits to doing that. If you join a company that's young and high growth, you can help create a culture of diversity and inclusion from the very beginning, rather than trying to scrambling to fix decades of blind spots. So I fundamentally believe that a big reason why the Business Insider newsroom and the Business Insider team has more women in power than men overall is because we had Julie Hansen as one of the founders. Julie Hansen is one of my mentors. She brought me into this company, but I think diversity breeds diversity, and that can help a lot. And so if you can go into a place where you can influence the culture from the beginning, that's a win. Another truth is that opportunities are faster when there's no hierarchy weighing you down. There's no one at a young company to tell you how to do things because it's never been done before. It's up to you to figure it out. And then if you figure it out, you can probably have that job. So there is not as much red tape around. Another thing that has helped me and a lot of my peers who I've seen at Business Insider go on to do great things is if you can join an industry when it's just being built and you can get in on the ground floor, then you will become the expert in it above anybody else, no matter how many decades of experience they have in the workforce. When I joined Business Insider in 2008, digital media was just budding. The Huffington Post existed, there were a couple blogs here and there, but it hadn't become a big industry or business yet, but there were signs that it could be. And it was fundamentally different, we realized quickly, than print, than any other media that had come before it, and I got in on the ground floor. And other peers that I've seen get in on the ground floor, one guy who was at Business Insider is now running CNBC Digital, another got a huge job at Bloomberg. People from the Insider family are running all sorts of media companies now, and a lot of that is because we became digital experts quickly. So one person who expertly used a startup to achieve lots of success is Melinda Gates. A lot of people know her as Bill Gates' husband, but no, she is accomplished, hugely accomplished in her own right. She was one of the first women to join Microsoft when it was still a startup. And her decision when she was graduating college as an engineer was, do I go to a huge company, IBM, or do I go to Microsoft? Her IBM mentor actually said, okay, if you get a job offer from Microsoft, you have to take it because it's going to grow like mad. And if you have the talent that I think you have, the chance that you'll have to advance there will be meteoric. And that person was right. She wound up managing a team of 1,700 people by the time she was 32. Sheryl Sandberg is another person who did this. She was in a government job. She went to Google on the advice from Eric Schmidt that if you get a seat on a rocket ship, you should take it. She took it, and then she joined Facebook when it had zero revenue, invested a little bit of her own money in it, and then took it to where it is today. Another great example is Steve Ballmer. Steve Ballmer joined Microsoft, I think, around employee number 30. He was paid $50,000 a year. Apparently was given just a ton of stock options because now he's a billionaire and owns the Clippers. So there's lots of examples of this. Those are obviously the extreme examples, but they're examples of this being a smart way to scale success. And another important part of this, and all those examples I just gave, is that if you join a company that goes on to be extremely successful, your success can grow exponentially with it, but also potentially your net worth can. Certainly if you're the founder of it, that's true. Occasionally for employees, Steve Ballmer is the extreme example. There's no other example like that on the planet. But through stock options, you can grow your net worth a bit with it. And an important point that I think more women need to think about earlier is building financial independence just for yourself. Be financially successful yourself. Because if we want to be equal with men, we need to build the same fortunes as men. Financial freedom equals more power, more influence, more opportunity to pull others up, and ultimately equality. So it really is tied. As proof, you can look at the Forbes billionaire list. This is from 2019. Every single one of them shares a common trait. They are founders of companies that went on to become huge or Fortune 500s, or one of their parents was. Someone in their family started a company. And by the way, all the top 10 are men. I think there's 2 women in here, and it says their dads or their grandpas were founders, but they're all men. And a startling chart that I have been pulling data on for some time is that hundreds of US companies go public every year. This is information from the NASDAQ. The NASDAQ is 208 years old. Hundreds of companies in the US go public every year, but only 15 in history have ever been founded and led by women. And 7 of those were in the last few years. So there's a stark gap between the size and scale of women growing companies and being able to scale their success in the way that men have. There are a ton of reasons for this. The venture capital model is broken. There's not enough women in venture capital. Because women haven't achieved the extreme business success that men have on as big a scale, there's no PayPal mafia type pulling other women up. But another problem is women are apparently not setting their sights high enough, often enough. In a survey of women CEOs, only 12% said that they planned to become CEO someday. All of the rest said that someone had to tell them or give them the idea that maybe they should consider becoming CEO. So I interviewed one of the 15 women who took their companies public. Her name's Julie Wainwright, the founder of The Real Real. And what she said to me is, you know what, like, here's the secret. Most of the people that are founders of companies or are part of high growth companies are not Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, or even Elon Musk. They're just determined. They have a big goal, a big vision, and they don't give up, and they did it. They thought about, I'm going to do this and I can make this happen. So the whole point of all this is to say, we need a lot of women swinging for the fences. And when women are in charge, it's not just some moral obligation to do this, it's actually better for business. A McKinsey study found that gender equality could unlock up to 28 trillion in global GDP, and Fortune 1000 women with female CEOs, Fortune 1000 companies with female CEOs perform up to 3 times as well as those with men in charge. So it's just good business. And then this is from a Melinda Gates book that she wrote last year. If you want to lift up humanity, empower women. It is the most comprehensive, pervasive, high leverage investment you can make in all human beings. So with that, I will go into my story, how I wound up on the startup path somewhat unintentionally and became editor-in-chief by 30. Growing up, I always loved media. I was really obsessed with magazines. In particular, I was obsessed with magazines from one company, the best magazine company on the planet, Condé Nast at the time. I would read it all the time. I would flip to the masthead and try and figure out who is the person who's figuring out all these stories I like to read. And I would look at who the editor-in-chief was and think, that's a pretty cool job. So I always loved media, and my dream was to work for this company. So I didn't know anyone in New York. I was an advertising major, but I had no connections in New York City or at this company. So I just worked really, really hard on my application for a really competitive internship. And I designed a resume and a cover letter to look like one of their magazines, a sort of like a last-ditch effort to get noticed by them. And so this is my resume that I put together. You can see it here on the right. It's my scant experience and my education, and I made it to look like a magazine. And it was enough to get noticed, and it was enough to get me a job there. So I wound up going to New York for the summer, staying at a friend's apartment for free, which was very nice of the friend, and getting an internship at my dream job. And I thought I was going to stay there, except that I got some excellent advice from the executive director of my group, Julie Hansen, who basically told me, don't try and get a job here. Just don't do it. It's not where the jobs are going to be. Magazines are going to crumble. It's going to go through a really hard time for print over the next decade. Go to digital media. It's where the jobs are going to be. You should really check that out. So I didn't know anything about the company she joined when I was graduating, which was Business Insider. The only thing that I knew was that Julie Hansen was one of the smartest business people I had ever met, and that if I followed her, I would probably be in good shape. So I would say follow smart people, even if you don't know where they're leading you. So I just blindly followed Julie into my first job and wound up as a 6th employee at Business Insider. Another thing that I would say is that the best you can, think about success early and plan for it. I would advise people, if they can, plan for it as early as you plan to have kids. Like, when did you start talking about with your friends, I want to have a family, I want to have 2 kids someday? Like, at that same time, I was still thinking, I want to be successful. I didn't know that I wanted to be a successful journalist per se, but I just knew that I wanted career success. And I think the reason that I was thinking about that at an early age is because I had a great role model in my own family. My mom came from humble beginnings, and she worked her way up to become a Fortune 500 executive. And so I watched my mom have an incredible career. She ran a huge team. She traveled a lot, but she was home for dinner all the time. And when I saw what she was doing, I figured, if my mom can have a successful career decades before I can do it, it's even harder. Like, I better try and carry that torch forward. So I was trying to plan and set myself up for success from a very early age. So I moved to New York City, where the media jobs were. I went into an industry that I cared a lot about, which was media. I found someone who I thought could be a good mentor to me. And I went into an industry that was growing. And then another important piece of this is I found a supportive partner. So Sheryl Sandberg once spoke at a Business Insider conference, and her advice was, the most important career choice you'll make is who you marry. I subscribe to that as well. I was fortunate to meet my spouse when I was 23, and somewhere between days 1 and 3, I said, I'm going to have a career. I only make $40,000 right now, and like, nobody knows who I am and nobody knows what I do, and I don't know what I'm doing, but I know that I want a career. And so if you don't want a career woman for a wife, or to even date, you probably shouldn't be with me. And I think that probably would have terrified most people. Fortunately, he stuck around, and he's been incredibly supportive. But my thought process was that if I don't figure out how to climb high enough, fast enough in something that I love, that's where I see a lot of women leaving the workforce. because when they do want to eventually have families, they either haven't climbed to a salary that can support the insane childcare costs. Kids cost so much money, or their partner has climbed farther faster, and so their salary and their career matters more. And so then the woman has to take a back seat, or the other person has to take a back seat. I wanted to set myself up to go farther, faster, and not to hold my husband back because he's ambitious too. But we kind of mapped out, like, is there a way for us to both be successful, to both have what we want? If we met early, that's a gift. Let's try and plan it out together. And so that's been really helpful to have his full support. So I wind up at BI. My first title is Sales and Marketing Associate. It's basically a catch-all for everything under the sun. I was planning our events. I was mostly doing ad code and ad trafficking, and I would like stick this wonky ad code on the site and make sure all the ads were firing, and I was running lots of spreadsheets, and I was incredibly bored. And by the way, I was not very good at this job. And so advice number 3 is that if you don't love your job or you stink at it, you need to switch quickly. I don't know that I would have fully come to this realization on my own, but Julie Hansen gave me another gift. She sat me down one day and told me, Alyson, you're not doing great. So like, I need you to step it up. For some reason, you're just like not flourishing in this job. So I was actually, I'm pretty sure the first person in all of Business Insider to be put on a performance improvement plan. So I was told that I was not good at my job, and it was this eye-opening, horrifying, terrifying, eye-opening experience where I realized, like, yeah, the reason I'm not very good at it is because I'm just not passionate about it. And so it made me really think about what I'm passionate about and what I'd rather be doing. I did manage to put in the hard work, focus on my job, and save my job and keep it, thankfully. But what I realized I loved to do was writing. I would look at what the editors were doing all day and just be so jealous. Like, I have all these story ideas I want to put on the site, and you guys get to do this job, and I don't. Like, I have so many. And so I realized that was my real passion, and I needed to figure out a way to get into it. So I started writing stories in my spare time at night and pitching them to the editors. So the first story I ever got published on Business Insider was about a nightmare interview process I had had with Google. Google had come to Syracuse campus. I managed to line up an interview. They asked me a ton of brain teasers, and I completely bombed the interviews. I froze on the spot. It was a disaster. And so I wrote about this mortifying experience as a personal essay, handed it to one of the editors, and he wound up publishing it on Business Insider. And overnight, it became the most read story we had ever published. It went completely viral. I remember our chairman pulling me aside at a Christmas party being like, can you like teach our actual writers how to do that, how to get that many people to read their stories? And on the heels of that success, I was able to pitch myself for a writing job. And I was the first person in the company to switch departments. So that's how I switched from sales to edit. I had to kind of like moonlight what I wanted to do. I'd have really supportive bosses who would let me do this. Now, this is actually a key way we retain a lot of talent at Insider Inc. is we do let people happily switch departments if they've proven that they're hard workers. But I was the first in the company to do it. And it was pretty terrifying, but it was extremely rewarding. And I shudder to think where I would be in my career if I'd stuck in my sales job. I definitely wouldn't have survived at Business Insider more than 2 years. And I don't even, it's just scary to think about. So I was able to figure out what I was obsessed with, and then I could step on the gas. And I think that's the key. That's where my career took off. I wish I'd figured this out sooner and I hadn't wasted 2 years in a dead-end job, because then I think I would have, I don't know, I just wasted time. So just don't waste time. Figure out what you love and then what you're great at, and then step on the gas. And what I loved was writing, but I also loved entrepreneurship. I loved that Business Insider was a startup. I was obsessed with figuring out like what other founders were thinking, how they were doing it, how venture capital works, like what is this entrepreneurship startup world? And because I was so curious, I became really good at it. I started breaking a lot of news. I was the first to write about Pinterest in a big way. I wrote one of the first big profiles of Travis Kalanick. I was at Uber's launch party in New York City because I was covering the beat intimately. I helped write the founding story of Snapchat, down to the legal battles that they were having between co-founders. And I was regularly writing about acquisitions and fundings and all sorts of things and creating a name for myself in the startup community. I didn't just focus on the Silicon Valley successes, though. I covered a lot of the failures, of which there are still many today. So I started kind of becoming known for doing like the definitive story on the ultimate implosion of the time. So there was this company, Klinkle, that had raised the biggest seed round in Silicon Valley history and then suddenly went bust. And I wrote the inside story on that. I wrote about this company, Fab, that had raised hundreds of millions of dollars at a multi-billion-dollar valuation and just went belly up. And then I started being able to train other reporters on how to do that as well. And then as my profile grew, I was able to get to more and more influential people to interview, and I was able to turn those interviews into news-making events. So I had LeBron James, a sports star in the US, tell me who he was going to endorse for president when it was taboo to do that in 2016. Interviewed Megyn Kelly the day that Matt Lauer got fired and asked her what she knew about the situation. And I was able to land the last interview with Adam Newman when he was CEO of WeWork, because I had been covering WeWork since 2011, and I had those connections built up. So when you're really good at your job, it's the best feeling in the world. Your bosses know it, they praise you, you feel good, like it's just awesome. And people outside your organization will recognize it as well. So one day I got a call from an executive that I had covered who said to me, "Hey, I've got this publication. Why don't you come be my editor-in-chief?" And my jaw sort of hit the floor. I hadn't managed anyone ever in my entire life. I was a tech correspondent, I was a reporter, and I was good at that. But this opportunity just made my eyes open. And what I came to realize is that I loved my writing job, but it was sort of an individual sport. And I felt like there was only so much influence I could have just by telling my own stories alone. And I could maximize influence if I was an editor, and I could control more stories, and I could put more into the product and just help develop a newsroom. And that got me really, really excited for the first time in forever. But I didn't feel like my work at Business Insider was quite finished. I was really passionate about this company. The company was really hitting its stride, and I felt good about my part in it. So I wound up having a really honest discussion with our CEO, Henry, who walked me through his plans for Business Insider, where he wanted to take the company, walked me through, like what I could do at the company if I decided I wanted to become an editor now that I had this realization. And what I realized is that I hadn't hit a ceiling and BI hadn't hit a ceiling. And so if you haven't hit a ceiling, even if someone's offering you a sexy salary and a sexy title right now, it might not be the best long-term decision you can make. I had it really good. I had a great job that I loved with people I loved doing it, a company I believed in, a mission that I was behind. It just wasn't the right time to leave. I hadn't hit a ceiling yet. I see a lot of people try and job hop their way to success, and I'm not quite sure what they're trying to achieve in that. It might be short-term good, but long-term bad. So I made a long-term decision and I stayed, and it was a great call. So I didn't get to run all of Business Insider right away. I had to, I started running the tech team, and I started managing a few of our other teams, and then I helped launch side projects along the way. And then all of a sudden, my boss got poached by CNBC to run CNBC Digital, as I mentioned earlier, and I heard Henry was looking for an editor-in-chief. And I put my hand up. I was not the most qualified by journalism standards in that I haven't won Pulitzers, I haven't been working for the New York Times for decades, but I was the foremost digital media expert because I helped build the industry. I helped build it at BI, and I was a great journalist. So it wasn't a terrible choice. Come on, I was like worth the shot. So I put my hand up, and I think that's an important thing to note. There have been studies that show that women don't raise their hands until they feel like they check every box, versus men are like, meh, I'll give it a try. I was definitely in the meh, I'll give it a try camp, and fundamentally believe that there would be so many people in your career who tell you no until you can't do something. Don't be the person to tell yourself no. Like, just try. What's the harm in trying? I don't think anyone will ever fault you for being ambitious. So I raised my hand without checking every box. And another thing that goes hand in hand with that is that, like, the best time to ask for a big raise is when your great work is undeniable, because that's when you hold all the cards. I see a lot of people in the company that I work with and outside the industry mess this up. They think that like time is the reason they should get a raise, or it's like they're justified because they ask their friends what they make and they feel like this is a reasonable request. When you do great work and everybody knows you do great work, that's when you are extremely valuable and you hold all the cards. So if you're just strategic about the timing of when you ask, you can get a much bigger raise and the raise that you deserve when it's undeniable. So I would take that advice as well. So I got the job when I was 30. Henry eventually said, yes, you can be my editor-in-chief. It was my dream job. It's amazing. I still love it to this day. That was 4 years ago. Every year I've been in the role, I think I've changed as a leader. I've gotten smarter and better. There are many things that I wish I had known that first year and done faster. One of the biggest things is figuring out your Achilles heel and solving it early. The second that I knew that I wanted to run Business Insider someday, I should have been working on more of those Achilles heels and getting them fixed. I had been a tech editor, but I had never overseen politics. And then suddenly 3 months after I get appointed editor-in-chief, Trump becomes president. And so I had to quickly learn a ton on the job, and you can learn a ton on the job, but it's easier if you can know where you're heading and then work towards that. And before you get the job, that can actually help a lot. Another thing that I wish I'd learned sooner is that you need to put a team in place that fully supports you and does great work for you, not who did great work for someone else. Sometimes you can feel like you need to keep people around because they were great and they were loyal to someone else, but the sooner you get your people in, the better. And also, by the way, great people can be your Achilles heel. You should hire for your weaknesses. You don't need to solve every weakness you have, but you can have other great people who can help kind of round you out as a leader. And the other thing I would say is that being underestimated or being different can be really powerful. And this has been hard for me to learn, but it is just the reality. I have been constantly underestimated in my career, constantly had to prove myself. My job by nature is a high-powered job, and with that comes the constant need to prove yourself. And that's a good thing. It keeps you strong. So you probably don't think of me or someone like me being editor-in-chief of a big business publication. I was once at a dinner where we weren't allowed to tell anybody what we did for a living all night, and then everyone had to go around the table and guess. And everybody at the end of the night guessed that I was like in beauty or fashion or something, some stereotypical woman job. No one there out of 30 people guessed that I worked in business or that I certainly managed a business publication. I have gone to Davos and been handed drinks by men at parties because they think I'm there as the help. Or I've been asked like whose spouse I'm there because I must be there on a spouse badge. Like I just don't look like your typical editor-in-chief, but that's great. And I think that actually is a really helpful chip on my shoulder that I now have. And it's a card that I can play, and it's helped drive me to where I am. Sometimes it does feel like pressure because not that many people who look like me make it to the top. And then I feel like if I fail, then it's one less role model for other people. So that's a lot of pressure, but that just drives me more. So in summary, here's what I would say. Premeditate your success as best you can, although I've met plenty of people who didn't plan for success and are plenty successful anyways. Go into an industry where it's growing and you can become an expert quickly. Move out of dead jobs or jobs that you're not good at very quickly. Figure out what you love and what you're great at, and then you can really step on the gas. I kind of liken it to being like a tourist who doesn't know where they're going. It takes them a lot of time versus like a local, and you know exactly where you're going, exactly where you're going. The second you know where you're going in your career, you can really explode. Don't job hop to success if you have it good and you haven't hit a ceiling. Raise your hand for the big jobs before you check every box. And don't be the one to hold yourself back because plenty of other people will. Ask for big races when you are the one holding the cards. Figure out what your weaknesses are and solve them. Fight for yourself and what you want because big jobs are high pressure, but they're also high reward, and aim very, very high. So that's it. Thank you all so much. I'll minimize my screen now, but I'm happy to answer any questions.
Wow, thank you, Alyson. Very, very interesting presentation, and thank you so much for the all the preparations and the very well-structured presentation. Thank you so much. And yes, please, everyone, feel free to send us your questions for Alyson in the chat function here in Blue Jeans. And a couple of questions have already been sent, and I will just go straight forward with the first one from Henrike. Question, as you said, you took a quite risky career path. How did you and how do you deal with doubters around you in case you come across some of them? How do you deal with people doubting you or doubting your decisions? And what do you do to interact maybe?
There are tons of doubters all over the place. Within months of my promotion to editor-in-chief, I had someone quit and tell a friend it was because they didn't want a 30-year-old to be their boss. Doubters are everywhere. I think you just have to really nail your confidence and be like, no, like I deserve this, I earned this, but I'm going to work hard to keep it, and I'm going to work hard to prove it to you. And then I think the more times you're right, the more times that like you go in with confidence and then you're right, you set the example for people to be like, oh, like she actually knows what she's doing. She's someone I should follow and I should lead. If you're constantly wrong, that's harder. But it's a lot of confidence building as well, because there will be a lot of noise out there and a lot of doubters, and that's been hard. You know, like it's not always supportive, and people don't always want to see you succeed. The higher you get, I think you see that the higher and higher you go, that you have to fight and fight and fight and fight to keep it and like build and build and build your confidence.
Yeah. And you also mentioned that you always had to prove yourself throughout your whole career. I think that's very interesting for a lot of us here. taking part and learning about how you dealt with that. So thank you. Second question from Madeleine. A question concerning follow smart people. Who are you following right now, and who are your role models now that you are a boss yourself?
That's a great question. Look, I mean, Henry has been a tremendous role model. I still think he's one of the most brilliant people that I've ever met, and he's a huge reason why I've stayed and helped build BI, because I believe in him and his mission. There's a ton of role models. I really admire Rebecca Blumenstein. She's the highest ranking woman at the New York Times. She has been a nice advisor and friend for help along the way. I admire what Jessica Lesson is building at The Information. She was one of the first to the subscription business model, going against the tide, and has really, I mean, her team is so loyal to her. She just like oozes leadership. I really admire that. I'd say that those are two.
Okay, thank you. Another question from Madeleine. Did you ever have bad experiences with colleagues trying to put you down when you raised your hand? And how do you make them see that you are suitable for jobs without sounding too self-assured?
So there's a couple things here. One is it does help to have supporters, and I was fortunate to have supporters along the way. So when I raised my hand for the editor-in-chief job, I had two other senior ranking men tell Henry that I would be great for it. I think that helped a lot. Like two other senior executives that Henry really respected were like, Alyson would be great. You should give her the job. And that is really important. You do need people in your corner. It is hard to get the top job if you're going against the tide and nobody wants you there. But at the same time, there are going to be people who don't want you there. And then I think it's the confidence thing again, and being okay if they leave. Like if you're the boss, you're in charge, and like then you really want a team that's going to support you. And if you've got people who are negative, who are going to pull the team down, you don't want them there anyways. So like the quicker you realize who's going to be there to support you and help build with you, and the people who are just going to like drag the rest of the team down and they leave, the better.
Okay. Carolina asks, how do you work with men who feel threatened by your success? Have you experienced that?
I don't know if any man has like explicitly said to my face that they feel threatened by my success. So I haven't had to address it head on, and usually if they are threatened, it'll work itself out, and then they probably won't work for me for very long. But I do think kind of like the higher you get in a company and just the higher you get in your career, I think the more of that you see. There's a ton of support in the beginning when everyone is sort of even and on their own, and then like the support gets harder and less, I think, the higher you go, because everybody wants those jobs and they're so competitive. There's so few people who make it, and it's lonely at the top, and all of those reasons. So I think you see it more. And actually, you might make fun of me, but Taylor Swift gave a really good quote about this. Someone asked her about like sexism that she sees in the industry. And she was like, when I was a kid, I didn't see it at all because things were just fun. And I think it's because people viewed me as this girl, like who was not a threat, who was cute and like wrote love stories. And then I started filling stadiums and it became a huge problem. And now I'm like a huge problem for people. And now I see it all the time. And I think that as you climb just in any career, whether you're filling stadiums or you're filling top jobs, you will your eyes will be open to more of that.
I really, personally, I like the fact that you had supporters on your way and were able to benefit from them supporting you. Really like that point, personally. Another question from Giovanna. I hope I pronounced your name correctly. Best shot and worst decision as an editor-in-chief at BI. And a second question, how do you motivate your team?
Worst decision at BI as editor-in-chief. I think it's just not moving quickly enough, or like following my gut quickly enough. I say that I wish I'd had more confidence when I stepped into the role, and I've had to work towards that over time, and come out with more conviction and been like, this is the way I'm doing it and this is right, and like, let's go, rather than like, I did a long listening tour, which I think is important. You kind of want to hear from people what they think the team needs and all that. But then like move. The second you know you want something, move. And I think I hesitated and waited a bit too long at times when I should have just been more charging ahead with what I felt was right and then getting other people on board rather than like making sure everyone's on board first and then deciding if it's the right decision. And was there a second part to that question? I can't remember.
So the second part was, how do you motivate your team?
How do I motivate the team? I try and be an empathetic leader. One thing that's been hard is that, and I hear this from a lot of other women in high-powered jobs, is that there's pressure to conform to do things the way that you think a leader should be, and like you should be tough and you should be mean and people should be scared of you and like stop being so nice. I think that you can be nice and you can still command a lot of respect. So I try and be very respectful and fun at times, but also like people know when I'm serious and they know when I mean something, and like I can be very direct. So like I think you have to have, I like to try and have empathy and some charisma, but then also like when I'm on and when I care about something. But being able to switch gears in switch modes is important for my motivation. Hopefully it's motivating.
Finding the balance there. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. A question from Juliane. She's a trainee at the journalism school here at Axel Springer, and she would like to know or do you have a recommendation how to get a foot in the door at a large-scale company when applying on entry-level jobs? So you told us about your very creative application. Maybe you have some other hints for her.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think the best way in is to know someone. And if you absolutely don't know someone, then you have to find a way to stand out somehow. And for me, when I absolutely knew no one, my only shot was to do something fancy. I actually did the similar thing to get the Google interview. I designed like this beautiful, crazy Google resume and submitted it. And even after that nightmare job interview with them that I had, I've actually met the guy at a conference through Business Insider a couple of years later. And he was like, I remember you. I remember your application. I remember what you submitted. That resume was crazy. I've never seen anything like it. And so I used, like, I'm a creative person. I paint sometimes in my spare time. I thought about being an art major, actually. So I felt like design was a way that I could stand out on paper when everybody else is just doing something else. So kind of find a way to do something respectfully a little bit different, I'd say, if you can't figure out someone that you know at the company to help you in.
Okay. Madeleine has another question. So thanks, Madeleine, for asking so many questions. Very interesting too here. How do you assure yourself that you are doing a good job? And do you sometimes feel that it's too much responsibility that you're carrying? And a second question there, do you collect feedback from your colleagues?
Yes. So one way I know I'm doing a good job is just performance. Like there's BI is actually a very data-driven company. So it's very transparent when like we have a lot of subscribers or like we have a lot of readership. There are numerical things like that. Also, like if you're assigning award-winning stories, like there are different kind of metrics of impact that you can see what impact you're making on the organization through what you're doing all day. And also just like keeping a running list of like wins for yourself. Like, okay, like I had this mission, I achieved it. It was great. Like this quarter, I was going to focus on this. I achieved this. That's great. So assessing where you are in the goals that you set forth for yourself, I think is really important, and making sure that those align with what your boss thinks your top goals should be. Because if you're like off nailing a checklist that's all of your own making and your boss wants you to be focused on completely different priorities or thinks success looks completely differently, that's actually not that helpful. So, prioritizing the big things you need to achieve and then like really being brutally assessing where you are on achieving those things. And then I do ask for feedback a lot. One of the hardest things I did about a year into being editor-in-chief was a 360 review where you ask 10 to 15 people who work for you to anonymously basically talk smack about you to someone else, and they can say anything that they think about you on the planet and your leadership as it pertains to work. And so I was given a binder like this thick of feedback from my 10 to 15 colleagues, and definitely cried, but also was relieved because I realized like okay, this is what people think about me. It's not that bad. There are definitely things I can work on and things that are totally valid feedback. There were some outliers in there, like just ignore those. And then there was actually a lot of positive about like how I was motivating as a leader and my strengths. And that was incredibly eye-opening and helpful for me. But feedback, well, sometimes will make you very sad, is also very important.
I guess you have to learn how to deal with that too. But
Yep.
it's good to hear that you collect it frequently or very often. A name, I hope I pronounced correctly. Graciela del Carmen asks, how do you deal with mistakes? As nobody's perfect, as we all know, and everyone makes mistakes. And how did you deal with mistakes, and how do you deal with mistakes?
I really try to listen to the feedback if I've messed up, and then I apologize. And sometimes, so like there was one newsroom meeting I gave recently where I said something in the wrong way and completely unintentionally offended somebody. And I really reflected on the feedback that they gave me. And I spent a day crafting an apology to the newsroom about like, I really had no idea that this is not what I meant. I would never, offending any of you would be my last intention ever. But now I understand why this came across that way, and I am so sorry. And I'm striving to be better all the time. And so I feel like meaningful apologies and really recognizing when someone has a valid point to you and you've actually made a mistake is important. That said, like there's lots of people who might think you messed up and you actually didn't, and like you just need to be steadfast in it. So I think you have to have a keen eye for like what's actually valid feedback and what's something that you just need to be strong on.
Okay. We have feedback from Carolina and Philip for you, which I'd like to read to you, for you to give you a break, maybe too. Goethe, Claudia, if you have any questions, please also just shoot. And from Carolina, the feedback, you're very inspiring, Alyson, thank you. And Philip writes, thank you for your valuable input, Alyson. It initiates me of some reflection as a member of the opposite sex.
That's awesome. I'm so glad.
So thank you from all of us too. Madeleine also writes, thank you from Madeleine too. He's also working for BI Germany, and thinks that it's a great inspiration for presentation of the answers.
I mean, probably I could ask a quite personal question. Probably the interview askers were quite young. And as a mom, so to say, I'm very keen to know how you balance private life and your very, very busy, obviously, and very reputable role as an editor-in-chief. How do you do that? Do you have tricks, tips for some moms, particularly in leadership positions, that could help?
It's hard. I think I mentioned, my husband is very ambitious too. I think one thing that helped us was like career goal setting when we were young, because we were both ambitious. So like he really wanted to quit his job and start a company. And we figured out like, okay, like here's how you can do that. And like, I really want to be editor-in-chief of BI someday. Here's how I can do that too. And so we really like honest and open from the beginning about like where we wanted to be, and then like trying to work out time with each other so that like the other one can achieve that. But it's really hard. He is really good to me, I would say. Like when the pandemic hit, our child was in daycare, and he gave me the better working hours when we had to suddenly take on childcare for ourselves. So we split the day. I was working from 8 a.m. to 2 p.m. and he started work at 2 p.m. until 9 p.m., which how awful are those hours? Like I definitely got the better end of the shift. But he knows that my job is big and important and hard, and that like I can't be gone during those hours, and he did what he could to accommodate me. And then like for his job, he's in sports, he has to work a lot of weekends, and so like there'll be days where I take Nathan all day, and then we like all get together for dinner or something. But it's, you know, we try and really tell each other what's coming up and what we really need, and communicate honestly and openly about it. And it's not smooth all the time. You know, there was definitely times when he's like, I feel like my job doesn't matter, or like your job matters more, and we have those discussions all the time, and it's a balance. But you know, we're figuring it out. There are no secret tips. They're none.
No, but that was already a lot of tips, right? So planning is key, choosing a husband or a wife that is supportive and it's working on eye level and sharing 50-50, right? I mean, that is a
Completely.
lot of insights already. Thanks a lot.
Of course.
I also have another question, Alyson. It's just, do you have a trick or a tip how you can focus when you can home on your kids? And I mean, since you probably are full of work when you come home, so is there anything that you force yourself to really have like quality time with your kid? Because for me personally, this is really hard. I mean, I love my kids, but still it's like to switch and then to really enjoy the hours or this little time you have is quite challenging sometimes. Do you feel the same?
Yeah.
Or, yeah.
Totally. I have to try and really sometimes even like put my phone in another room so I'm not tempted to check emails and Slack and all the messages coming in. But also it's just like getting really comfortable with the team that you have in place to handle things when you're not there. And I'm really lucky that we have a really strong team at BI where there's like almost never a time where there's like something mission critical between the hours of 5 and 7 when I put my son down for bed that like won't survive until 7 o'clock. So I really try and like I put my phone in another room. Sometimes I really try to not check it and trust that the team has it down as best I can. But it is something I'm constantly dealing with because I really just don't want my son to just see my phone in my face all the time. And the hours now that we thankfully are in a situation where we have a nanny, which is such a godsend. I can really try and focus between 9 and 5, and then like before 9, it's hard, and I am sort of juggling meetings and then going back to see him and meetings, going back to see him. But I really want to try and do the separation. It's something that's always top of mind.
Yeah, this is a very good tip, but it's very hard. Yeah, you have to be very disciplined again. Yeah.
Yes.
Thanks.
I think another thing that's helpful is that a lot of our management in our company has young kids, and so they understand a bit more. So like Nicholas, my boss, has a 2 and a 5-year-old. Jess Liebman has a 2 and a 5-year-old. My executive editor has a 1-year-old. Our managing editor has a 1-year-old. Like we all know that like children come high priority. So there is, I think we relieve pressure from each other in that way. We're lucky to have that.
Okay. We have time for one more question and one more greeting from Giovanna from BI Spain, if I understand correctly. And she writes that BI US is our role model here in Spain.
Ah, awesome.
Greetings.
I'm so
Spain,
glad. Thank you.
Very international today here, like that.
Woo.
And maybe I have one more question if there is no other one. And Lucas, no. You said that you had a mentor yourself, or several mentors. And are you planning, or are you already being a mentor yourself for young women? And so are you trying to already now, even though you're still very young yourself, trying to support younger females or males too, of course, and try to give them something for their way on a personal level?
Yeah, it's a great question. I try. I could probably be better at being more proactive about it. I try. BI is a very flat organization, and I try and be accessible to anyone, from a fellow who just came in the door to our most senior people who might have questions or need something at any given time. And so I just try and be there, but like dedicating all to like 1 or 2 people, I haven't done as much. It's probably something I should work on.
Okay, no, I didn't want to give you a to-do
Yeah.
from today, but from all of our special guest speakers that we had here, they were all telling us about their mentors that they had. I think Shahrazad, she met her mentor in an elevator by coincidence, and then she was able to just learn a lot from someone else and who helped her in some decisions.
One thing on the mentorship front is that I think that like it's tempting to go look for a mentor, but like a mentor is a two-way relationship. Like you can't be the only one needing something from someone. You also like ideally would bring value to the relationship and help them. So like all of my like mentors have been first of all, like the way that you can help your boss is you can just succeed. And then if you succeed, you make your boss look good. So like the better you are at your job, the more people will want to mentor you. And it's like a symbiotic relationship rather than it's like, hey, what's your advice on this? And what's your advice on this? What's your advice on this? And just kind of like constantly asking questions without bringing value yourself to the situation. So I think that like in hierarchies, especially, mentorship is a two-way street. And the most value you can bring is to be successful or figure out how to be successful.
Okay. Then one last text and question from Kritasha. Thanks, Alyson. I've been at Politico Europe since we launched 5 years ago and the company today, as I'm sure you understand. It's very difficult to the startup it was 5 years ago, different from the startup it was 5 years ago. Do you have any tips on navigating larger structures while maintaining the startup vibe?
That's a good question. I mean, one thing that we do at Business Insider is, first off, like we're always trying to kind of create fresh ideas and new ways of doing things. So one project I'm working on is, for years we had a news team on business. We disbanded it because we didn't feel like we needed any more. The verticals and the desks were doing a great job of hitting all the news. Now we're bringing it back because of the way that we've grown and structured, like it just makes sense again. So like constantly reimagining the way things are, the best that you can, and not just settling on the way things have always been. And what's helpful is that because BI is 13 years old or something, there is no real way things have always been. We're always we grew up as a culture of inventing because we had to build a company from scratch, and we're still inventing, and that's in our ethos all the time. But something else we do is like if someone has an idea, with permission, they're often able to go try it. And then we give them like a couple resources. And if we find that that idea is working, then we start pouring fuel on the fire. So like my boss, Nicholas, helped start insider.com for us. He had this idea to create more of a general interest site than business, because business is very much more narrow. And so he went off, had a team of like a couple interns and started building it, and it worked. And now it's like a huge, it is our company. So we didn't give him like a team of 200 people immediately to go run insider.com, but he's helped build that up. And so we do thoughtful experimentation. And then when we see experimentation work and it's a priority, then we pour fuel on the fire and scale things that way.
Okay. Then I only have a very, very large thank you to give to you from all of us, from the whole organization team, and I guess also from Gülşah and Claudia, if I may speak for you. And we have just one more question to the participants. If you'd like to give us feedback just on the event format itself, on the digital networking event series that we have here, then please feel free to give us your feedback on sly.do or slido.com as you like, and enter the code ASWomen in one word. And there you will just have 3 short questions that will help us to improve the next events. And yeah, I hope I didn't. One more tip: if you'd like to join our Teams group, Microsoft Teams group, as Women Network, you find the link all the way in the top of the chat box. We posted the link to the Teams group right there, and then you'll be able to keep. Lucas posted again. Thank you very much, Lucas. You'll be able to keep up to date to all upcoming events and other information in the Women's Network. And Gülşah, Claudia, if you'd like to. Some final words, I'll hand over.
No, I think you said it all. Thanks a lot, Alyson, also from our side. It was very, very inspirational and very valuable. Thank you.
I'm so glad. Thank you so much for having me. This is fun. And it's awesome to be in your company. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thanks,
Bye.
Alyson. Have
Bye.
a good day.
Thank you.
You
Yes.
too. Thank you. Have a great night.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.